example, we're trying to take the first steps at the development of a field of wisdom research, which doesn't exist as a formal area of academic study.
We'll start to get at identifying some of the mechanisms that underlie intuition, which is this, in some ways, very mysterious, introspectively unreportable phenomenon. We'll begin an analysis of wise decision-making at the level of cognitive processes, and then if some of the findings that we predicted emerge, then it could have implications for how these two mechanisms operate in non-conscious thought a little more generally.
Study. And in those parts of the academia where wisdom research is carried out, it's not carried out with great communication among those areas and has not spread to other areas.
Wisdom should accrue within an individual. And if, to the extent that our wisdom is shared with other members of society, wisdom should also accrue over time within that society. And I think that's one of the reasons we're so interested in the question of wisdom. So, as part of an assumption behind my proposal is that the value of wisdom is not so much in a given individual, but it's in its transmission.
Why this is the critical time to be making some efforts to try to put some new ideas into the intellectual discussions.
My claim is twofold. One is that music allows us to communicate profound psychological insights that are not easily communicated through language. And two, that music, and sort of in a similar vein, is able to create a psychological state in a listener that is potentially contemplative and reflective, and which supports wise decision making.
Rise to intuitive responses to individual cases, and that then ordinary people engage in the same types of processes that philosophers do. That is, they can create moral principles on the basis of their own intuitions, and then ultimately use those moral principles to judge future relatively similar cases.
Yeah, and based on ideas that are thousands of years old, are those ideas appropriate for the types of considerations and challenges that we face today?
The stakes, I believe, in biblical interpretation are high. We know more about the background of the Bible and less about what it means than ever before. We find ourselves, unfortunately, in this situation in a time when the need for humane, responsible, and morally satisfying interpretation has become, in my view, urgent.
Knowledge in itself is not going to be sufficient to get us there. I think we also need understanding, and that includes issues such as foresight and understanding the consequences of different actions, how actions of today will affect us tomorrow and further into the future.
Wisdom should include accurate affective forecasting. That is, we should have a good sense of how we will feel in the future. It should also include accurate interpersonal affective forecasting. And by that we mean predicting how someone else will feel as a result of our behavioral choices.
Our colleague Clark Gilpin has recently noticed in some discussions that wisdom has been elided from our public vocabulary largely. It's no longer part of the discourse that we have publicly in talking about our policy or talking about decisions that are made at a governmental level or at a university level or at an individual level.
It's important to distinguish three levels. One is what life challenges the person has actually encountered. The second level is how they've dealt with those life challenges. And the third level is, in the long run, how have they integrated them into their life story.
So the ideas or the hypothesis is that people who have high self-interest or are partisan will be less successful at applying their wisdom-related knowledge to conflict management. And we would also like to begin to address the question of whether applying one's wisdom-related knowledge is a process that requires experience and practice.
One reason may be that we have stopped thinking about wisdom in the kinds of ways that in the past we've been informed by. And we have an opportunity now to bring together from very diverse areas and interests a group of scholars and scientists who can start thinking again about wisdom.
Grandmaster chess players, it turns out, do very little deliberating when they're playing Grandmaster chess. When they're playing against really strong opponents, they look at a setup on the board, and it immediately occurs to them that there are 2 or 3 viable options. And to the extent that they deliberate, they spend their time thinking about those 2 or 3 viable options. But they don't see an enormous panoply of options the way a computer program would. But what's even more interesting is that when they're playing master level chess, if they just do what immediately occurs to them, they will win virtually all of the time. So they, in some sense or another, see directly what's required by the situation without having to reason it out, and in particular without understanding in any sense the rational principles underlying the goodness of that action.
Our goal in bringing you all together here is to create a nexus of people who are going to be imaginative, creative, open to new ideas, and looking for a way of redefining and creating new types of wisdom for our time, for the 21st century.